Curiosity carried Caleb Ward down that lonely snow-covered road, though he couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the faint trail of smoke rising where no homestead stood, or the tiny flicker of movement against the endless white. The winter wind howled low through the cottonwoods, lifting the brim of his hat and sending frost biting across his jaw. He was a man who'd grown used to silence. 5 winters since his wife's passing, 5 seasons of talking only to cattle and wind. But something in that faint smoke pulled him like a half-remembered dream. When he rode closer, he saw them, a woman and a little girl huddled beside a dying fire. The sight stopped him. The woman's shawl was too thin for such cold, her hands red and raw as she tried to coax a spark from wet wood. The child sat close, a small figure in a ragged coat, watching him with solemn, startling eyes. She could not have been more than 5, yet her gaze held something far older. Caleb swung down from his horse, boots crunching through the snow. "You folks lost?" he asked, his voice low, carrying the weight of the wide land around them. The woman startled, clutching her daughter closer. "No, sir," she said softly, her breath trembling. "Just restin' a while." The child rose before her mother could stop her. Her small boots sank into the drift as she stepped forward, chin lifted, courage trembling in her voice. "Mister," she said, looking up at him, "can you marry my mama, so she doesn't die sad?" The words hung in the frozen air like a prayer too heavy for heaven. Caleb felt something twist deep in his chest. The woman's face turned crimson with shame. "Lila!" she whispered sharply. "That's no thing to say to a stranger." Then she turned to him, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, sir. She doesn't understand." But the child's eyes didn't waver. They were filled with the kind of fear a child should never know, the fear of losing the only person left who loves them. Caleb couldn't find any words. He just nodded toward his horse, then the darkening horizon. "There's a roof a mile yonder," he said quietly. "You'll freeze out here before morning." The woman hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. At last she nodded, helping the little girl to her feet. Caleb offered his hand to lift them onto his horse. The woman's fingers brushed his glove, thin, cold, trembling. He could feel her hunger and humility through that fleeting touch. They rode in silence beneath a sky bruised purple with twilight. Snowflakes fell soft and slow, dusting the brim of his hat, the little girl's curls, the woman's shawl. The sound of the horse's hooves and the faint creak of saddle leather were the only things between them and the emptiness. When they reached his ranch, a modest spread nestled against the foothills. Warm lamplight spilled through frosted windows. The air smelled faintly of hay and wood smoke. Caleb dismounted, helped the woman down, then lifted the girl carefully into his arms. She weighed little more than a sack of flour, all bones and courage. Inside, the heat of the fire wrapped around them like mercy itself. The woman stood just past the threshold, uncertain whether to step farther. "Sit," Caleb said simply, motioning toward the hearth. "You'll warm quicker if you stop shiverin'. Her name, he soon learned, was Eliza May Carter. She had come west after her husband's death, chasing work that never came. The world had not been kind to a widow with a child and no kin. Lila leaned against her mother, half asleep, her small hand clutching a threadbare doll. Caleb ladled stew from the pot still warming on the fire. "Ain't much," he said, placing the bowl before them. "But it's hot." Eliza hesitated before taking it. "I'll repay you for this kindness," she murmured, "when I can find work." He shook his head. "Eat first. Words can wait till morning." As they ate, Caleb studied them quietly. Eliza's beauty wasn't the kind that shone under light. It was the kind worn thin by sorrow, yet still unbroken. Her eyes were blue-gray, haunted and soft at once. Lila kept glancing toward him, half afraid, half fascinated, as though trying to decide whether men like him could be trusted. When the meal was done, Caleb brought out a quilt and laid it near the fire. "Best stay here tonight," he said. "Barn's too cold. Storm's blowin' worse." Eliza tried to protest, but he'd already turned toward the door to tend his horse. Alone, she exhaled shakily, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Just for tonight, my darling." she whispered. We'll be on our way come morning. Outside, Caleb brushed snow from the saddle, his breath fogging in the lantern light. He told himself they were just passing travelers. Come morning, he'd point them toward town, maybe give them a few dollars for supplies. But even as he thought it, something inside him ached, a quiet ache he hadn't felt since before the fever took everything from him. When he came back in, Eliza was dozing upright by the fire, her daughter curled beneath the quilt. The woman's face looked softer in sleep, stripped of worry. Caleb set another log on the fire, and stood watching a moment longer than he meant to. Then he turned away, the sound of the crackling flames following him up the stairs. Morning brought silence, the kind that follows deep snow. Light streamed through frosted glass, painting the floor in pale gold. Lila was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the fire, and watching the embers. When she saw him, she smiled shyly. Mama says thank you for letting us stay, she said. Wasn't any trouble, Caleb replied, pouring coffee. You sleep warm? She nodded. I dreamed we had a house. Just like this one. Eliza stirred then, blinking awake. The moment her gaze met his, embarrassment flickered across her face. We'll be gone soon as the road's clear, she said quickly. You've done too much already. Caleb set his cup down. Roads won't clear for days. You'll stay till they do. There was no softness in his tone, yet no cruelty either, just quiet certainty. Eliza opened her mouth, then closed it again. Pride warred with exhaustion in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. In the days that followed, the rhythm of life at the ranch shifted. Eliza insisted on working, mending shirts, sweeping floors, feeding the chickens. Caleb let her, though he never asked it of her. He began to notice the way she hummed softly when she thought no one heard, or how Lila followed him through the barn, asking about horses and ropes with boundless curiosity. At night, when snow rattled the windows, he'd sit by the fire while Eliza read softly to her daughter from a tattered Bible. Her voice was tender, trembling yet strong. The child would drift to sleep, and sometimes Eliza's eyes would lift to meet his across the firelight. No words passed, yet something fragile and human bridged the silence, something both feared to name, but outside, tongues were already wagging. The town of Willow Creek never let a story sleep. A widow and her child living under a man's roof, that was enough to stir whispers in every saloon and church pew. When Caleb rode into town for feed, men nudged one another, smirking. When Eliza came to fetch flour, women watched from porches with tight smiles. She felt their judgment burn her back like sun on fresh snow. That night, when she returned home pale and shaken, she spoke quietly by the hearth. We'll leave soon. You've been kind, but I can't stay where I bring trouble. Caleb looked up from his chair, shadows crossing his face. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, softly, You'll stay till spring. No one freezes under my roof. Eliza lowered her gaze, tears catching the firelight. She wanted to argue, to protect him from the weight of her shame, but when she saw the steadiness in his eyes, the words faltered. Outside, the snow began to fall again, softer this time, like forgiveness. Inside, warmth spread through the silence, fragile but real. And though none of them dared speak it aloud, all three knew that something had begun which the winter could no longer bury. Spring came slow that year, like a promise the land was afraid to keep. The snow melted into silver threads running down the hills, and the air filled with the scent of wet earth and thawing pine. Caleb Ward stood at the fence line, watching his cattle move through the new grass, yet his thoughts wandered back to the house. He could hear laughter drifting faintly through the open window, Eliza's soft, unguarded laugh mingling with the child's delight. It was a sound his home hadn't known in years, and though it warmed him, it also scared him. He built his life on solitude. Now it felt like the walls themselves were learning to breathe again. Inside, Eliza was kneading dough, flour dusting her sleeves. The kitchen glowed with morning light, and Lila was perched on a stool, humming as she pressed her tiny thumbprints into the dough. Every gesture Eliza made carried quiet purpose, every breath the memory of survival turned into grace. She'd grown stronger since winter, her cheeks flushed with color, her steps sure and light. Caleb paused in the doorway, hat in hand, uncertain whether to speak or simply stand there and take in the sight of a life remade. Eliza noticed him and smiled, though her eyes flickered with the same restraint that always sat between them. "You'll take bread with you?" she asked softly. He nodded, then glanced at the child. "Lila's gettin' to be quite the baker. She says she's learnin' from the best," Eliza replied, her tone playful but shy. For a heartbeat, the silence felt easy. Then she turned back to her work, and the moments slipped away. Caleb left with his loaf and a restless feeling he couldn't name. Out in the fields, he tried to lose himself in the rhythm of the ranch, mending fences, checking calves. But his mind kept circling back to the house, to her. That evening, he rode into town for supplies. The sun dipped behind the ridge, staining the sky in copper and rose. Yet peace didn't follow him there. Whispers followed instead. Men at the saloon looked up as he passed. A few offered half-grins that didn't reach their eyes. He heard one of them murmur, "Ward's keepin' himself a widow, ain't he?" The words hit harder than they should have. He ignored them, bought his flour and nails, and rode home through the gathering dusk, jaw tight. When he returned, Eliza was sitting on the porch, Lila asleep in her lap beneath a thin quilt. The night wind brushed through her hair, carrying the faint scent of lilac. She looked up as he approached, reading the strain in his face. Someone said something. She guessed quietly. He hesitated before nodding. "Doesn't matter much what folks say." Her gaze fell to the sleeping child. "It matters to them." To her. She smoothed Lila's curls, voice trembling with quiet pride. "She deserves a place where whispers don't follow her name." He wanted to tell her she already had that place here, but the words stuck. Instead, he said, "If folks got nothing better to talk about, that's their sin to bear, not yours." She smiled faintly but without joy. "You're kind, Mr. Ward, but kindness don't change how a town sees a woman alone." The next morning brought a visitor, a sheriff on horseback, dust settling behind him like smoke. Tom Hargrove was an old acquaintance of Caleb's, honest but bound by duty. He tied his reins and tipped his hat. "Caleb," he began, voice heavy. "Word's come up from Kansas way. Eliza May Carter, there's folk claimin' her husband left some debts unpaid. A trader says she ran off before settlin' 'em." Eliza stepped onto the porch before Caleb could answer. Her hands were steady, though her eyes were storm dark. "That man's lying," she said. "My husband died owing nothing but his own wasted years." The sheriff shifted uneasily. "I believe you, ma'am. But there's papers filed. If you stay here, it could stir trouble for the ranch." "I'll go," Eliza said at once. "I won't bring harm to anyone who's shown us mercy." Caleb's chest tightened. He could see how much those words cost her. The idea of that house without her, without the laughter, the light, made the air feel thin. When the sheriff rode off, Caleb followed Eliza to the barn where she was packing the few things she owned. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." She turned, tears glittering unshed. "I won't let you pay for my past." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "You're not a debt to me, Eliza." His voice was rough, low. "You're the first peace I've known in 5 years." Her breath caught, but she shook her head. "You're a good man, Caleb Ward. Don't ruin that by keeping me here." He looked at her a long moment, then said simply, "This is your home. No one's taking it from you." That night, a storm rolled over the hills, rain pounding the roof, wind whistling through the cracks. Lila woke crying, afraid of the thunder, and Eliza gathered her close. When Caleb came downstairs with a lantern, he found them huddled together by the fire, the mother whispering soft comfort. For the first time, he saw not the burden she feared she was, but the strength she carried, the kind that holds worlds together through storms. The next morning dawned clear and gold. The sheriff didn't return. The gossip faded as quickly as it came. Folks in town found other stories to whisper about. Life on the ranch went on, quieter now, steadier. Eliza's laughter returned by degrees, no longer tentative but rich with belonging. She moved through the house like she'd always been meant to, her presence a kind of light that reached even the dustiest corners. Caleb found himself building her a small garden plot by the porch, saying nothing when she smiled through her tears. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley in honey-colored light, Lila ran across the yard clutching a single wildflower. Her cheeks glowed with excitement. She stopped in front of Caleb, holding it out with both hands. "Mister," she said, the same word that once carried desperation but now carried hope. "Can you marry my mama now? She's not sad anymore, but she still looks lonely sometimes." The question stole his breath the same way it had months before, only softer now. Eliza stood frozen at the doorway, eyes wide, mouth trembling between laughter and tears. Caleb looked from the child to her mother, and something in him broke open. He knelt before Lila, taking the flower carefully. "Maybe," he said, voice gentle as spring wind, "we'll talk to your mom about that when the time's right." Lila grinned, satisfied, and darted off to play, leaving the flower in his hand. Eliza stepped forward slowly. "You don't have to humor her," she whispered. He met her gaze steadily. "Wasn't humoring." Silence stretched, warm and fragile. The smell of rain lingered in the air, sweet and new. Eliza's hand lifted slightly, as if to reach for him, then fell back to her side. "You've given us more than I can repay," she said softly. Caleb's reply was barely more than breath. "Then don't repay it. Just stay." The sun slid behind the ridge, throwing their shadows long across the porch. Lila's laughter echoed from the fields, and the world seemed, for once, utterly still. That night, they sat by the same fire where sorrow had once slept. Lila dozed against her mother's shoulder, and Eliza looked up, her eyes reflecting the flame's gold. "I used to think we were cursed to wander," she murmured. "But maybe we were just being led home." Caleb reached over, placing the wildflower gently beside the fire. "Home's where folks stop runnin'," he said. Outside, the wind carried the scent of lilac through the night, and the ranch stood quiet, alive again. Inside, three souls rested together beneath the same roof, not bound by promises yet, but by something deeper. And though no one said the words, love had already taken root, steady as spring after the longest winter.